Okay, ladies and gentlemen, our knowledge report will put the spotlight on unlocking the $2 trillion retail opportunity in the next decade and activist agenda. And this report has been curated in partnership with RAI by Boston Consulting Group. I'd like to invite Mr. Abheek Singhi, Managing Director and Senior Partner, to make a quick presentation on what the report is all about before we formally release the report. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Abheek Singhi.
Good morning, everyone. So it's with a sense of, is there an echo? No? Okay. So it's with a sense of deja vu that I come here. I think this is the 11th or 12th year, and I see some things which are common, there are some things which are different, and the one thing which is different yet the same is Nagesh, 12 years back, I used to see you wearing a jacket. Then in between, you changed over to somewhat more traditional Indian, and I followed suit. But today I saw you back in the jacket, and So let me just start off, and there is a large report that the team from BCG, Bharat, Sid, and Charu and team have put together. I'm not going to even attempt to try to put all the key findings of the report, but just a few salient elements I wanted to share with the group today. 11 years back, a colleague of mine and I wrote a book which we call the $10 trillion opportunity, which is what we said would be the size of the consumer opportunity in India and China in 2020. This is something which we did in 2011. In 2017, I get a call from our global CEO who said, hey, you guys predicted this 7 years back. Are you on track or not? Okay, and the first rule of prediction is, you make predictions for so long out that you're not held accountable later. But unfortunately, I was in a situation that I was actually there, and we actually tracked and we did the analysis in 2019 December, and we heaved a sigh of relief because we were at 9.5 trillion plus, and we said 2020 10 trillion will happen, and then COVID happened, and of course the 10 trillion was missed by a whisker. Today when I talk about 2 trillion, I'm sure the number which is going through everybody's mind, the thought which is going through everybody's mind is, how will 2 trillion happen? One question, if one looks at what has happened in India, it took us 63 years after independence to get to 1 trillion. If one looks at the next trillion, it took 7 years. If one looks at the next trillion, it took 3 years. If one looks at what is going to happen over the course of the next 7 odd years, it's expected that India is going to be about a $7 to $8 trillion economy by 2030. Now, at one level, this number may look ridiculous. I wanted to share some numbers with you. China hit the $1 trillion mark in 1998. It hit 2 trillion in 2004. It hit 3 trillion in 2007. It hit 4 trillion in 2008. It hit 5 trillion in 2009. It hit 6 trillion in 2010. This is the power of compounding, and therefore, to say that we will add more than what we have accumulated over the last 77 years, over the next 7 years, actually is not outlandish. It is actually just the simple law of compounding. Now, in this context, India's growth, of course, has been driven by consumption. If one looks at the last 15 years, because I believe that 1 year, 2 year numbers are misleading. If one looks at a 15-year period, consumption actually has grown marginally higher than GDP, and India has been driven by consumption. Now, the one question which is there is, what unites India? And any time that somebody would ask this question, what would be the answer that you would give? What unites India? Anyone? Cricket. Anything else? Bollywood. Right? So this is the obvious answer, but I think here also things have changed. When I was growing up, cricket was, Bombay and Delhi were the strongest Ranji teams which were there. And actually movies was Bollywood or Mumbai film industry. But actually if you look at the last 2 years, the biggest movies have not been necessarily Mumbai movies or Hindi movies, but they have been Indian movies. And actually the face of cricket has also changed. But I would say there are two things over the last decade which have also united India. And those also have an implication on retail, which is actually GST and digital. I think this is the one big difference which has happened over the last decade as to what unites India. Of course, it is this, but I think what has happened from a taxation perspective, what has happened from a digital perspective is actually what unites India today and what will unite India going forward. In the context of retail, this becomes even more important because many of the unlocks that we are talking in retail are actually facilitated by what you see on the right-hand side. Now, if one looks at, I recall about a decade back, I was on the stage here and BCG had made a prediction as to what would happen on the Indian retail market and also on what would happen on e-commerce. On my left and on my right were two people, one from the brick and mortar world, Kishorji. On the right hand side, Mr. Bansal from Flipkart. Both of them vehemently disagreed with what we had projected. Kishorji felt that we were overestimating what would happen on e-commerce and Flipkart felt that we were underestimating. As it turned out, the truth was actually in between and we actually again took track as to what we had predicted 10 years back. Are we on track? And we had talked about the retail growth being about 10% and that has tracked except for the COVID year. And if this goes over the next decade, India's retail market will actually be a $2 trillion market, which is there. Now, growth is one element of it, but let's look at organized retail. And what we did here was to actually on the left-hand side looked at the last 3 years numbers, 4 years numbers, organized retail, and we looked at the underlying category growth. So actually, organized retail, barring the COVID year, has been growing much faster than the underlying categories. So what I mean by that is if one looks at food and grocery as a category, how has that grown? And how have the organized retail players grown? Then we looked at jewelry, we looked at apparel, we looked at electronics, and across every category, organized retail has significantly outperformed the underlying category. If one looks over the last 18 months, actually that gap has started narrowing. Yes, organized retail is still growing faster, but it is not growing 2.5 times, but it is growing more like 1.5x, 1.7x, which is there. The other element that we looked at was actually profitability. And we looked at profitability over the last 2 years. I recall the conversations in this room a decade back used to be on two things, profitability and FDI. Today, actually, if one looks at the panel which was there, it was an all-India panel which was there. And actually, if one looks at profitability, it has moved, barring one category, in the right direction and actually in line with global profitability. Now, is this just a one-year phenomena? Is this a multi-year phenomena? So what the BCG team did, and they hated me for asking them to do it, was to take a 10-year view. So let me take a minute to share this slide, and if there is one slide that you should recall from this presentation, it is this. A BCG presentation cannot be complete without a 2x2. So what we have here on the x-axis is EBITDA percentage, and on the y-axis, revenue growth. And what we did was to look at last 10 years, and what we did was, if you look at the right-hand side, it is where the profitability has been good. Okay? And the way we defined good was different for different categories / subsectors. On an average, it was slightly less than 9 to 10%, but across different categories, different thresholds were taken. And then on the y-axis is revenue growth, and we took a 10% growth. So if greater than 10%, then it is good. If it is less than 10%, that's bad. Now, interestingly, in 10 years, there have been 2 years, and one of them was last year, where actually both growth and profitability have been in the green zone. So last year actually was a good year for retail because both growth and profitability on an average was actually above the threshold. But if one looks at each of the other years, 8 out of 10 times, there has been an issue on either growth or profitability. So if one looks at this, and we have 30 odd retailers that we looked at for this, these are listed players, and you see how the performance has varied. And it's important to de-average this because this actually shows that while last year may have been good, in order for the retail industry to achieve its potential going forward, there has to be a concerted effort on both growth and profitability. There are players, as you see on the right-hand side, who have done this 5, 6, 7 years out of 10. But if one looks at an average, 2 out of 10 years over a 10-year period is what has happened in the past. Now, what is the implication of the same? And of course, growth is important, but profitable growth, and we looked at a correlation to the shareholder return, is even more important. But what is it, as we think about the pace of growth going forward, that we have to keep in mind? And you will see details on each of these 6 boxes in the report itself. The first piece is just pace of growth, and I would say the short message there is a steady pace of growth which is there. However, it's the middle which is the more important one. The impact of the same is actually different across different categories. If one looks at last 15 years, consumption on a nominal basis, like I talked about earlier, has grown at about 10.5%, 11%, in real terms about 6%, but products have grown at 8%, services have grown at 12%. So, the shift which is happening is different. The difference across volume growth and mix is different, and that's really the thing to keep in mind within each category. And finally, where is the source of growth happening? Is it in the Mumbais and Delhis of the world? Is it in the Nasiks and Raipurs of the world? Or is it happening in Tier 3, Tier 4? So looking at a de-averaged picture is important to keep in mind as we think about sources of growth. And one last slide, and I'm not going to spend time on this given my time is up, is the fact that it actually requires an activist mindset. Growth and profitability, as we saw, is not a given. Only 2 years out of 10 have we been able to achieve both as an industry, and therefore, what is going to be required to make this profitable growth happen? There are 5 approaches which are there, and we found that retailers who have been successful, both globally and in India, have done a combination of 2 or 3 of these 5 to actually realize that aim, that ambition of profitable growth. If I had to put one clarion call for the group here, and I see retailers across categories, retailers across sizes, I think the one clarion call for action is something which the retail industry has done multiple times in the past. And I think in order to reach that 2 trillion, there is one thing that they will need to continue doing is to actually take charge of their own destiny. So, you saw that slide on the right-hand side in terms of there were companies who have done 5, 6, 7, 8 years out of 10. Those are the companies who have really taken charge of their own destinies, who have not waited for the market to correct, but actually have adopted some combination of these 3 to make it happen. My one request to all those present here, the BCG team has spent countless hours over the last few months creating this. Please take time to go through the 70-odd page report. And in case there are any questions, clarifications, please feel free to reach out to any of us. I do feel very excited as I talk about the retail industry today. I think the mood 10 years back, even 5 years back, used to be a bit of despondency at times, a bit about what will happen on regulations, what will happen on profitability. I think today, it's not as if there are no challenges, but the mood is in terms of what can be done to unlock the opportunities and face the challenges head on. Thank you.